This is Ceylon from spirituallivingforbusypeople.com, and today I want to talk about boundaries. Boundaries is a subject that so many people struggle with. Setting boundaries, having the right amount of boundaries, because we associate it with being mean, or with being selfish, or being rude. But boundaries, proper boundaries at least, really has nothing to do with any of those. It's really about ownership, about taking ownership over your own feelings and emotions while giving others back their own feelings and emotions rather than taking them on as your own. So it's really about lessening that confusion that we can have over where my feelings end and yours begin. And let's face it, it's much easier to blame others for how we're feeling rather than taking ownership over how we feel. So instead of setting boundaries, we blame. And so excessive blaming is usually a really good indication that there are poor boundaries in the relationship. So I want to just talk a little bit about this and to hopefully help us understand how boundaries actually allows us to be more generous and is probably the most generous thing you can do for others, as opposed to seeing it as something that's selfish. Now, if we think about our physical property, I think very few of us would find it acceptable to not have physical property boundaries, right? So a place where I know my property ends and another begins. And I don't think you would find it acceptable for people to cross those physical property lines without permission to enter. Well, in the spiritual realm, it's very similar, right? So in our spiritual lives, we need to have boundaries and we need to be very careful about who we allow in and out. And if we allow a person in one time, it doesn't mean that they're allowed forever and ever. So that we have to establish a way that people understand that they need permission every time to cross certain boundaries. So this is very important. So if it's acceptable in the physical world, then we need to understand that it's absolutely critical, maybe even more so, to have in the spiritual world. Because not only are boundaries good for protecting ourselves, it's really good for protecting others as well. Because when we're not willing to enforce our boundaries, what often happens? We often get frustrated, we often get angry, we get resentful, and that's often smoldering inside. And then sometimes we lash out against the very person that we're trying to hide it from. So it really helps people as well. It is, again, like I said in the beginning, one of the most generous things we can do for others. So how do we go about setting boundaries? Well, first, we have to pay attention to how we're feeling in our every interaction in the day. And that when we're feeling stressed, when something's happening, if somebody's asking too much of you, if somebody's asking you to go well above and beyond what is expected, to stay up and talk all night, whatever things you have, you know how you feel when somebody is trying to take advantage of you or ask too much of you. Notice when you're feeling that way. Those represent your spiritual property lines, that you're approaching that property line. The more tense, the more stress that you feel. So pay attention to those. And a second strategy would be, it's very simple, just learning to say no. Now, we find it very hard to say no. We want to say yes to things. I know, because I'm a people pleaser, I love to say yes. But it really backfires after a while because you start getting stressed out, you start feeling resentful. So we need to start bringing no back, to start saying no. Now, here's something that you can do if you struggle to just say no outright. You can ask the person, whoever's making the request of you, whatever it is, to give you either a couple hours or a night to think about it and get back to that person. And it at least gives you a chance to consider whether this is something that you think that you can contribute to, something that will not cross a personal boundary line for you. It at least gives you some time, as opposed to just saying yes immediately, which is a pattern that many of us unfortunately find ourselves in. I know I've done it many times. You say yes, and then right after you regret saying yes. So try those two things and see how they work. But I hope that this at least helps you to see boundaries in a more positive light. That is, it is not something that's negative, that it's actually positive, generous, and life affirming. Something that we all need to do, not just for ourselves, but for others. And as part of the practice of setting boundaries for yourself is allowing others to do the same for themselves, so that we affirm one another and our need for our own space. So that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And you can leave a comment below saying what you think, how you've struggled with boundaries in your own life, and the steps that you're taking to enforce those boundaries. Thank you.